You're watching or listening to TV Club, and for the next half an hour, we're going to be talking about survivors, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I'm Dylan.
I'm Jim.
And I'm John.
Okay, so behind the scenes, we're recording this 35 minutes late thanks to a breakdown in somebody's computer. I'm not pointing fingers. Oh, I am pointing a finger. It was my computer that broke down, which just seems utterly appropriate for the conversation we're having tonight, doesn't it? But before we get into the conversation we're going to have tonight, when people talk about survivors, there is something they always bring up, which is the good life, back to the nature, back to the ground sort of thing. People never really talk about the context of why programs like The Good Life and I suppose to a certain extent Doomwatch were around in the 70s. As somebody who was alive and vividly remembers living in the 70s, and I'm going to do this because I don't know if Jim will recognise some of what I'm about to say, but I just want to set the scene for when I first watched Survivors. So in the 1970s, I spent approximately half of my primary school years in Sheffield. And we all know what was filmed in Sheffield 10 years later, right? And then I spent the second half of my primary school years in a tiny little village in Devon called Starcross, in a school where, I mean, the village was so small, my class was 9 children big. So I went from a school of 600 primary school children to 9 people in my class. But the thing was, this was the time when nuclear, the Cold War, was all around. It was the threat that was on the tip of everybody's mind all the time. And even if you weren't consciously thinking about it, I don't think, for us at least, I don't think it was ever off your mind. Jim, does that sound familiar? Because you're the nearest to me in age. But in the 1970s, the nuclear thing was like this ever-present thing that never really got spoken about, but that was often thought about.
And that seems a little early to me to be worried about that.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly later the early 80s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Early 80s. It was, it was just in the back of your mind all the time. I'm not sure, as a callow 9-year-old or whatever, I was thinking about the nuclear thing. Rabies was everywhere, and that crops up, but the nuclear threat, I don't think I was thinking about back then.
See, I know we were, because I have this memory at the age of maybe 9, and I don't know if I'm conflating the memory or misremembering slightly, but we were sitting on the playing field in the school, the entire school, maybe about 30 kids or something. And either we were talking about what would happen if the nuclear siren went off and where we'd all go and what we'd all do, or there was a test and the siren went off and we all had to react to it. All I remember is the whole school was there and we were having a conversation about what would happen. And this is, kids from the age of 5 up to 10 or 11. What I'm coming back to is The Good Life and all that. Yeah, the whole thing that people talk about in terms of survivors. Terry Nation, he was doing his version of The Good Life. I don't think Terry Nation was doing his version of The Good Life. I think Terry Nation was doing his version of John Christopher's The Death of Grass. Now, The Death of Grass was the novel John Christopher wrote in the 60s, which was about a virus that killed off the food source. So it killed off all wheat crops, which also meant it killed off pigs and cows and sheep, because they also would feed on grass and wheat. So the entire food supply for the human race in the course of 3 months one summer just disappears. And John Christopher's story is, well, what happens then when there's no food stuff left? Who survives and how do you go about surviving? And I think Terry Nation is doing his version of that. So it's still a virus. This time it kills mankind. But then it's about, well, how do the survivors survive and who survives of the survivors? Because not all of the survivors are going to survive because you have a dwindling food supply. And I think the thing that informs both of those stories is the thing that was in my head when I was 9 on that school field in Starcross with like 8 other people or whatever it was. Because the thing that I always thought about was, if that siren goes, We've gone from Sheffield, which would be a target, we'd be dead. The bomb would fall, we'd be dead. We've gone from there to a place that's in the countryside that has Plymouth 40 miles on one side and Portsmouth 60 miles on the other side. So we are far enough away to escape the devastation, but then we have to stay away. We have to stay ahead of the radiation and find a safe place that's away from the radiation, that's far enough away from the cities. And I can remember always thinking, even at the age of 9, and when we get to Dartmoor or wherever, everybody else who lived in all the towns and villages around is also going to be on Dartmoor, and there's going to be nothing to eat. What do we do?
Eat each other.
But you see what I mean? My point is, if I was thinking that at the age of 9, then you can sure as hell bet that John Christopher was thinking about that when he wrote about the supply of foodstuffs dying off. And you can sure as hell bet that Terry Nation was thinking about that when he was writing about a virus killing off the majority of mankind and the rest of them relocating to the countryside, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So-
there's a very good chapter in the Invasion of Dinosaurs Black Archive about this kind of thing.
I wonder who wrote that.
I've no idea.
Do you see what I mean, though? Nobody ever
yeah.
brings that up in conversations about survivors. And I wanted to start this podcast off by making that point before we talk about how good the series is, right?
It's very much a Terry Nation theme, though. The society that's been annihilated and finding ways to survive. It's there in the Daleks. It's there in the Dalek invasion of Earth with the virus there. Iridius in the Chase, and so forth. It's essentially probably the ultimate Terry Nation series because it's people trying to survive, trying to battle nature, battle the odds, battle just keeping the race going. It's reducing humankind to almost the basics of instincts.
Just to finish off John's point, it's taking what happens during the Second World War and imagining A, not only that the Nazis won, but that B, most of humankind was killed off in the process. Go on,
And no
Dylan, sorry.
organised rationing. So.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think people often look at this or look back on this now through the prism of sort of modern post-apocalyptic series and films and things like that. And truthfully, there aren't loads of them before this point. Like there's the sort of classics that, things like Out of the Unknown will pick at, but they tend to be more sort of futuristic sci-fi. We're all living in a dome. There isn't like a template yet for what a post-apocalyptic drama looks like, I think, at this point.
Or there's the War of the Worlds and the Day of the Triffids, which are about the apocalypse itself rather than about what happens afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is essentially the sequel to Day of the Triffids, basically.
Again, it's that abandoned city thing, isn't it? Dead London of War of the Worlds, and again, it's there in Invasion of Dinosaurs. It's there. It's partially there in that 3-day week as well, because obviously with the power going down, people were scared of of the power essentially running out. What do they do? It's very much in the atmosphere, and Terry Nation's really drawing on that contemporary politics.
Yes, because Doomwatch is all about the various scenarios in which these kind of things can happen, and Doomwatch is essentially just like however many episodes there were, 40 or 50 episodes, imagining different scenarios in which you could get to survivors. So it was all in the air, and I'm just positing the thought that the reason it was in the air was because of the Cold War, which is a line that I don't ever seem to see getting drawn, really, oddly. I mean, loads of people will probably write in now and say, oh yeah, haven't you seen X or heard about Y? But I'm just saying, in these conversations, people always talk about sort of what happens after you've drawn the line, but they don't talk about where the line is or why it's there. Anyway, should we talk about survivors?
I thought we were doing well on that.
Well, yeah, we've talked about, but I usually start with these conversations off with, and I'll do this now. I watched this on broadcast, despite the fact that I was tiny, because I had weird parents who wanted to include me in the things they enjoyed. So I spent the 70s watching Spike Milligan and Dave Allen and Survivors and Monty Python. My childhood memories are all of programs like that rather than kids programs, really.
It explains a lot.
Jim, as the next so I mean, this is probably going to be, well, I bought the VHSs or I bought the DVDs, but I don't know. Jim, you are old enough, potentially you could have seen it. Do you know if you saw any of it on broadcast? And I should add, I don't remember it really from broadcast. I remember watching it. I don't actually remember much of the programme itself. Sorry, Jim, go on.
Well, I had a similar childhood to yours by the sounds of it, and similarly damaged, I expect, as a result. I mean, I'm sure this was on in the house, and I'm sure I would have watched it. I don't remember much of it, but I have one very vivid memory of one scene in series 3 from Mad Dog.
Oh my God, it's the same one I have a vivid memory of. It's the bit where they're by the river and the dogs are coming.
No, not quite. It's Maurice Perry staggering out of his house, foaming at the mouth. That had a rather profound effect on me. Because, like I said earlier, rabies was in my thoughts more than the nuclear issue, I think. It was all. I think there's a series, isn't there? Was it The Mad Death? I think it comes after this. I can't remember. I'm sure it is this that I remember, because it's when I saw it again, I thought, bloody hell, that's the thing that I remembered. I don't remember anything else about the episode or anything else about Survivors from the time. I was 9 at the time for Mad Dogs, so that had a profound effect on me. And I didn't see it till I got the DVDs. I can date exactly when I saw the DVDs because I was between jobs. And I got the DVDs and just binged the whole lot in one go, and that was 2006. But between 2006 and now, I loved it, but I haven't watched it again until now.
Oh wow! Oh yeah, just to finish my thought, I bought the VHSs of the first season when they came out because they staggered them, so there were 2 episodes on a tape, and they did 2 tapes a month. So it took 3 months to get all the tapes, and when I got down for tapes 5 and 6, tape 5 had sold out. So for 10 years I lived without 2 episodes of season 1. Plus then at the end of season 1 there was like a 9-month wait before they started, and this was in the days before the internet. And of course papers like The Enemy and that, they said when they started doing the first season, but they didn't say anything about when season 2 was being released or season 3. So I missed season 2 and 3 as well. So for many years I had an
Dreamwatch.
I don't know. I wasn't buying those anyway. So the point being, I had 11 episodes of season 1 of Survivors, which I watched every single year on my birthday in October. Every single year on my birthday in October, I had a week off work and I would rewatch those 11 episodes of Survivors, and that was my week off every single year for a decade.
I hope you had jelly and ice cream with it.
Damn right. I mean, anything that involved electricity and me being able to prove it wasn't really going to happen. John, when did you see Survivors?
I saw it when the VHSs came out. If I remember rightly, a friend of mine I think he'd probably taped them, and so he was selling off the VHSs. So I saw the first season. I got it en masse for about 20 quid,
right,
which was pretty good value.
Oh yeah, because those individual tapes with 2 episodes on were 11 quid each.
Exactly.
So it was already 66 quid or something just to buy season 1. It was ridiculous.
The price was just like, fine. And then I think I didn't see anything of season 2 and 3 till it came on BritBox, which would be sometime during lockdown. I think I saw the rest of it.
Right.
So, appropriately enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I like the top-go viewing.
To finish off that thought, I saw season 1 so many times. And season 2, prior to this, I'd seen twice, and season 3 once, because those DVD sets came out a year apart. So I remember rewatching season 2 before I rewatched, I suppose, because I'd seen it first time around, season 3. But then, because there was no season 4, I didn't rewatch season 3. So this is the first time I've seen it since the DVDs came out. I keep bringing it back to me, but then it's my favourite programme, so I'm bound to, right? Dylan.
So I was always aware of Survivors, being a Doctor Who fan and someone that read things like Dreamwatch, and I remember seeing the video cover for it in the sleeves of also available from BBC Video and Doctor Who videos, seeing it on shelves and things, but never actually watching it. And then I've got vague memories of it being on UK Gold on a Sunday morning, and seeing bits of it after Doctor Who or Blake 7 and thinking this is shit, and just not engaging with it at all. I can remember vividly seeing episode 1, I think it is, when Abby wakes up, or is it episode 2? I can't remember. And her husband and her kid are dead. And
Episode 1.
Yeah, episode 1.
Fourth Horseman.
And just thinking this is terrible acting, and I'm not going to get involved in it. Then a few years later, probably 5 years later, six years later, they came out on DVD, and my mom bought it because my mom loved it, and she was like, "You need to watch this." Yeah, and my mom's 64 this year, so she sort of would have been the right age to sort of see it in sort of teenage years, I would suspect, late teens. And my mom's actually been quite influential on certain things. There was always certain shows she remembered from her childhood that basically she knew if she mentioned, I'd buy the DVD of, and she could watch again because I'm a cult TV fan. But this one,
Fiendish.
Yeah, she loved it so much. She bought it and I watched it. I loved that first season. And then a couple of years later, I think it was, I bought the other 2 DVD box sets and watched them and then sent them back to her.
Is that a comment on your appreciation of seasons 2 and 3?
Yeah.
No.
Dudley.
They're still on the shelf behind me. It was just to share them with her so she could
I see.
enjoy them, or not, as she often
But we'll talk
doesn't.
about whether it goes off a cliff, because what we've done for this is we've all watched the first season, and then I think the 3 of you have dipped into seasons 2 and 3, and I managed to rewatch all through both of them. So we'll probably talk mostly about the first season anyway, but we'll talk a bit about what happens thereafter. I've got to say, I said a few minutes ago, this is my favourite programme. Clearly, if it was my favourite programme, I'd have seen seasons 2 and 3 rather more than I have. Although, there are things that happen that mean that might not necessarily have been the case anyway. But that first set of 13 episodes, I think, is just incredibly strong. And so the other piece of received wisdom is about this sort of behind the scenes struggle between Terry Nation and Terence Dudley about what direction the program goes in. And the received wisdom of it is Terry Nation wanted it to make it about sort of fighting between the survivors to see who gets the spoils of war, who gets to sort of dominate the sort of surviving food supplies and this kind of thing, whereas Terence Dudley wanted to turn it into a program about farming when you've got no electricity, but you know what electricity is. So these people who had access to technology but no longer have. But I don't think that's really true. And even if it is true, I think what comes out of that struggle is something that's far better than if either side had been dominant. I think Survivors with Terry Nation, but without Terence Dudley, would have been terribly dull, because it would have been pretty much the same thing week in, week out. I think Survivors with Terence Dudley and without Terry Nation, well, we slightly know, don't we, what it's like, because season 2 and season 3 are going in that direction. But the other thing is, season 2 and season 3 are informed by being written by people who've watched the Terry Nation episodes. And so actually, I think that sort of balancing act between the violence of the post-apocalypse and the sort of survival aspect of the post-apocalypse, I think is a balancing act that it pretty much keeps up throughout. And it's a balancing act that makes the program as fascinating and as compelling as it is. I've got to say, I might, at the end of this, ask us each to nominate a favourite episode or something, or a favourite moment or a key scene or something that stands out for us. And I don't want us all to say Law and Order, obviously, that being the other bit of received wisdom. But just to sort of head that conversation off a bit, my favourite moments in that first series are sort of around about episode 6 and episode 7, when they find the house and they create a base and they start to get a group of people together. Because when I was 9, sitting in that field, listening to that siren or talking about that siren or whatever, I always wanted to know that I would be in a safe place with a group of people around me who would keep me safe. And that part of the first series of Survivors, that for me is the part that most played to the things I wanted to see the series doing. So I don't know.
Balances Terry Nation's sort of instincts, isn't it? Because Terry Nation is a very nihilistic writer. So
But
that
the other
kind
thing
of
about Terry
building
Nation,
of community against the apocalypse, that's lovely. That's what gives that season its heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not against. So Terry Nation does the same thing in the Dalek Invasion of Earth, doesn't he? Basically,
Totally.
very similar.
Plague wiped out isolated
Yeah.
communities until there's a community formed. Can't do anything.
The thing I think it does best is when you do get insights into all the different communities, and sometimes there is friction, and sometimes there is, trade and things like that. And it just gives you an insight into how different people would deal with this situation. So sometimes it is cabbage farming, and other times it's scavengers in the city and things like that. So like it's that's all these different voices and this perceived turmoil behind the scenes, as you say, just makes for like fantastic individual episodic stories that sort of all roll into the other.
There's a great moment in those 2 episodes I'm talking about where they first get, and I forget, Chris Tranchell turns up, and his first scene is he spends 2 minutes talking about, well, you should do this with this field, and you should do that with that field, and you should do this with this crop, and you should do that with that animal. And I just thought that was absolutely glorious. And whoever wrote that episode, and because of my computer malfunction, I don't have the list in front of me, whoever wrote that scene clearly knew what they were talking about, or clearly looked it up, but made an effort to give it sort of verisimilitude. It feels real. He feels like a real person, and that feels like a real situation. And I just think that if the series had gone sort of in either of those 2 directions, you wouldn't have that reality, because it would feel weird that it wasn't dealing with the other stuff, I think. Jim, of the first series, what's your sort of takeaway? I'm not asking for a moment or an episode yet. I might ask about that later. But I mean, what's your overriding thought about that first series?
Well, first, I think if Terry Nation had his way, he probably wouldn't have got series 2 and 3, because I think that gets old pretty quickly. It does reoccur. It ends up being sort of it's very character based. It ends up kind of being problems or relationships within the group or things that they have to deal with in nature, and then it's meeting people. You meet good people or you meet bad people, and the bad people lead to these kind of Western style shootouts that you get in a few of these episodes, which I'm sure is right up Terry Nation Street. But like you say, it's everything else that makes it a more cohesive sort of unit, really, and makes it more compelling viewing. And it really is a character piece rather than an action piece, I think.
I tell you, talking about those shootouts, one of the very best ones, I'll see if I can look up. No, it doesn't. Is it the Future Hour, the one where they go back to the quarry? The one where they go back to the
Vic,
yeah, the one where they go back to the quarry, and there's a shootout essentially that lasts for about 25 minutes. And at the end of the shootout, what happens? Did they shoot the bad guy? No, they make friends with him and take him home. I mean, if that doesn't say everything about these people that the series is about.
And
go on.
I was going to say, in the shootout, of course, being with a man who is injured and trapped alone, sort of, who's just managed to set up his own defense system, and who's in a desperate situation and thinks everybody's abandoned him.
Yeah, and that kind of unexpected twist of that is practicality is very much the twist in that kind of second half series, because there are people who do terrible things in that second half series, but they have to have them in the community because it helps them survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's go back a bit then to the start. I'm going to ask a question that might not be the obvious place to start, but what do you think of the decision to keep Ian McCulloch back for the second episode? Is that like a weird thing to do? Or was that actually something that, because for me, I think if you can watch it with the episodes following hard one on the other, it probably takes away some of what that actually did. But if you watch those episodes a week apart, I'm thinking, yeah, the first episode is just about these 2 women, and then you introduce another character, and that kind of sets up a template for the series that it's going to be about introducing people and the relationships. And it's not just going to be about these 3 people, but it's going to be about a series of changing relationships.
Yeah, but I think you get that with Dennis Lill as well, because Dennis Lill obviously shows up in that episode where he's talking about breeding. You think, oh, well, this is the maniac of the week,
Yeah,
and
Corn Dolly.
and he becomes a regular as well. So I think, like you say, it's just slowly introducing these characters, and we don't have, because of the way the society is, it can't be as disposable with its people and indeed its characters in each of these stories. It has to keep in the waifs and strays that you would normally dispose of.
Yeah, and I mean, I like that with the first story, because you're introducing this big, huge idea that, you've had the title sequence, so you know what's going on. You're introducing the idea of a devastated world just through the angle of one person. Yeah, I know it sets up Abby as the main character, which will kick them in the arse at the end of episode, at the end of the season. But that's exactly how you'd kind of do it today. You'd concentrate on one story. I mean, was it The Last of Us? There was that third episode where they just had two almost unrelated characters, and that's probably the highlight of that series.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the great things that first episode does is it tells Abby's story, and she's in a village in the countryside, and it tells Jenny's story, and she's in the middle of London, in the middle of the city. So it's able to go backwards and forwards between these two places that couldn't be further apart.
Mm-hmm.
So they get to really, really different story trajectories for that first episode until they meet, not in the first episode, but in the second episode. So the second episode is what you would normally expect the first episode to be, where the characters come together. And this is probably why the sort of revival does a double length first episode, so it can tell the whole lot in one go. I think it's really clever that first sort of 50 minutes only has two of the three main characters and doesn't have them come anywhere close to even meeting before the end of it.
It's a Trick Nation Pulse game with Blake Seven. Because Avon is in the first episode, and you don't know who's going to be the crew until, well, at the end of episode 2, maybe an episode into episode 4 with Callie on that.
For Callie,
yeah, and in fact, even then, you still get Aurak becomes number 7 in like episode 11 or something, isn't it? 12,
13,
12?
I think.
13
is the one he actually comes on board.
Is there? Is 12 where they fetch him? I can't remember.
Or
it's a long time.
Yeah, that's where they hear about him, and then they go and fetch him. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, there you go. Blake Seven. The 7 come together across the course of 13 episodes. But yes, that is kind of what's going on here, isn't it? And Peter Bowles, of course, is. I mean, if you go in cold and you've not read in the Radio Times that this is a program about like Ian McCulloch and Roald Dahl's niece or whatever, you go into that first episode and you would fully imagine that it's going to be a program about Peter Bowles. It sets up the wife who's going to meet him as if, a bit like in Star Wars, where you meet Luke through the robots, you meet Peter Bowles through the wife. It feels like she's there to be set up as an introduction to him and his character. And of course, watching it with the benefit of hindsight, it's clear that they're setting him up to die in everything he does in that scene around the dinner table, right? He's not a survivor. But watching it on broadcast, you would fully expect it to be a program about what he does and what he gets up to. He's the sort of above the title star in sort of movie terms.
He's the biggest name.
Yeah, I just think Terry Nation, as Doctor Who fans, we tend to disregard Terry Nation. I think that first episode of this, the first 4 episodes, I think he writes 3 of the first 4. I think the first episodes of this are just astonishing television, really. So I think we undervalue him.
I think he's undervalued because he's almost formulaic at times. You're going to get this survivalist thing. You're going to get people in conflict with circumstance and fighting, post-apocalyptic worlds. I don't think he's got the greatest range.
Having said that, though, he wrote comedy for like Tony Hancock.
Yeah.
So it's not as if.
But do we remember any of that?
Apocalypse Survivors is the only
very
thing
successful.
he does.
And I think people tend to disregard his ITC stuff as well. Like the Baron couldn't be much further removed from this, or Blake Seven, or Doctor Who. I think he can become formulaic within a show, but I think he has a huge amount of range working within different shows.
Gurney Slade, wasn't that him? And wasn't that utterly different too?
No, Gurney Slade was Anthony Ewley. He actually wrote that, didn't he?
They
Did
wrote
he?
it as
What
well.
am I thinking of?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of something else. There was a pilot, wasn't there, that Terry Nation wrote? that
Oh,
is just-
was it the one with Robert Hardy, isn't it?
I can't remember. All I do
Magnificent.
remember is that it was a million miles away. And let's be honest, he did a lot of Avengers too, didn't he?
Yeah.
Which also is pretty dissimilar, really, from this kind of thing. Even if, okay, the point being, I think, is that I think we tend to pigeonhole Terry Nation, and I don't think he deserves it. I think it's that we tend to look at the stuff that was most successful and kind of lump that in together, but we ignore the stuff that he did that maybe hasn't lived on for various reasons, and those reasons aren't necessarily always to do with quality or because other names are associated and we don't necessarily think of him. So when you think of the Avengers, you don't think of Terry Nation, you think of Dennis Spooner and Thingamajig.
Brian Clemens.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with Terry Nation is you always had that the anecdotes about Terry Nation, chucked an outline at me and I wrote it up into an actual full script, and he buggered off in his taxi having pocketed his check.
But clearly
again,
that
that's
didn't
unfair.
happen as often
No.
as people like to make out.
And
It's
probably
an
later on
exaggeration.
in his career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we made the money.
And also, Donald Tosh only started telling those stories once Terry Nation had died as well.
Donald Tosh not being the most reliable of narrators, shall we say?
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that the other sort of received wisdom about this is that everybody's clothes are way too clean and it's all sort of like upper middle class accents and all this kind of stuff. But again, I don't think that's as true as people make out that it is.
No.
So, for example, this time through, I was kind of watching the clothes, and you'll get several episodes in a row where the characters are just wearing the same clothes day in, week out. And it's clear that that's a deliberate choice to show that they don't have a lot of choice over what they wear. And yeah, those clothes aren't like ridiculously tatty by the third episode in a row or whatever. But then I don't suppose they actually would be, unless those people were like fighting their way through hedgerows and brambles and barbed wire all the time. And they're not doing that. So I don't know why people would expect their clothes to be considerably dirtier, because that's not kind of what the series is doing. And there are plenty of times when they actually do show them in like dirty, damp or torn clothes as well.
Also, if there's going to be anything there's an abundance of, it's clothes. Every house and every supermarket and shop and what have you is going to be full of them. So it feels like they could all be dressed in suits the whole time and it'd be fine.
Well, Tom Price, his suit and his Rolls Royce, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think with the accents and the middle class, you're just criticising BBC drama at the time, really. It's the grammar of what you're watching.
Plus, it's a criticism that I don't think bears water anyway, really, because you do have Tom Price, and then when they kill him off, they get what's his face from Ambassadors of Death instead. Name's gone out of my head.
John Abineri.
John Abineri for series 2 and series 3. He becomes the Tom Price character, and even then,
agenda, damn them.
Yeah. So Jenny and Abby are sort of fairly upper class, but Ian McCulloch's character isn't necessarily. He's fairly well spoken, or he has a fairly well-to-do accent, but he's clearly not playing upper class or even really upper middle class. I don't think he's playing a sort of lower middle class working man made good because of what he does, I think.
And we do see a lot of other characters, like I forget the name of the character that is driven in by his assistant, who is quite clearly from like upper classes. And there are characters throughout that are like, it may not be because I think these images are a lot easier to paint these days, and people differentiate them with accents and things like that. But because it's that RP, these characters are written differently. It's just a lot of them sound the same.
Yeah, Lucy, for instance, her story as she comes out of London, that is not the story of some sort of wet behind the ears, spoiled upper class twit getting out of the city.
She's in a flat share with somebody. She's not rolling it. Abby clearly is.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose Abby is the kind of establishment that we see, and someone you might not expect to do very well in these, straitened circumstances. And the same with Jenny as well, really. But and then you start meeting people who thrive on it, and people like Paul, the Chris Tranchell character, seems to do very well because of his sort of agrarian sort of background. And then you get somebody who's very upper class in Jimmy Garland, who who owns a house and stuff, and he's in his element because he's such an outdoorsy, self-sufficient type of person. He thinks it's interesting to see the doom and gloom of this is, our society has crumbled, but with Jimmy Garland, it's like, no, this is the kind of thing I've been waiting for. This is where I shine. And he's a really interesting character for that, I think.
That was always the thing about it, wasn't it? There's a kind of really depressing thing about being the last survivors of an entire species, but there's also a really romantic thing about, well, this is our opportunity to go back to the beginning and start again.
Make it better.
To try and make it better, and sort of that's what the series becomes about in the sort of second and third years. Let's talk a bit about Law and Order, because that's the kind of episode that you can't ignore, because everybody does need to talk about that. It is well now.
Bad dog.
He hasn't got rabies, I checked.
Phew. It is a special episode. It's a devastating episode, and I don't know how many times I've watched it, but I have the kind of brain where I don't remember the details, so every time I watch it I forget quite how it finishes. Every time I watch it, it gets me again afresh. How real and how visceral an ending that episode comes to. But the point I think I want to make about it is that kind of episode gets kind of elevated amongst fans of the series as if it's like it stands apart from the rest of the series, and clearly it's an absolutely magnificent episode in terms of the writing and the acting, but I don't think it stands apart from the rest of the series. I think the rest of the series is sort of quietly just as good, every bit as good as that is, really, for the most part. I think maybe the last two episodes, the last one for sure, maybe the last two, are slightly weaker as Terence, Dudley and Terry Nation try and make the last couple of episodes about what is to come, and because of behind the scenes circumstances that gets undone, and we'll come to that in a minute. But I certainly think that the first 11 episodes, I would say, of series one are basically of equality, and I think Law and Order is just something that epitomizes that quality rather than stands apart from it. Is that fair, or do you think it does stand apart?
I think a lot of the power of Law and Order from me kind of derives from what happens in the Future Hours, the next episode, isn't it? I think.
Yes.
Because having Greg having done all this, threatened Abby to keep Tom Price on board, to keep those crimes concealed because of his value to the community, he gets killed off in the next episode. That's a brilliant move, and that kind of really adds something if you rewatch Law and Order.
Justice is served.
Yeah.
See, for years I lived without that episode, so I didn't know that had happened. But yes, actually, that's a very good point you make, because I really noticed that this time around. All this stuff about you get to the end of the episode, nothing must be said because Tom is too valuable to the community, and it's all about, every week it's about ripping asunder all the assumptions that you and the characters make.
But it's also about where that focus is, because the next week we meet Huxley, played by the Ron Dutt actor, I think it is.
Yes.
And he's a nasty piece of work, and he's introduced as quite a likable character at first. He's a wheeler dealer, he's a trader, he's after people's gold, but he has kept this woman basically as a sex slave for the entire time. It's just it's just as horrible concept. It's just thrown away because they're concentrating on something else. So these horrible people exist throughout the show. It's just Law and Order gets put on a pedestal because it really focuses on the crime and the perpetrator.
I think the other thing about Law and Order is the fact that it really shows that they're on their own. There isn't any justice system, and they have to make really, really difficult decisions like this. on their own without recourse to someone else whose job it is to sort the kind of stuff out. And you think this kind of thing might be happening in every single isolated community that's forming. So I think it's big in that sense. But yeah, there's quality all around that episode as well.
And sort of 6 or 7 episodes earlier, you've got they go into that supermarket and there's the looters will be executed, and it's the same sort of thing. They're now going through their own like law system, and that other community have just got there quicker with the looters and things like that. So it's them suddenly becoming the thing that they were rallying against only a few episodes ago.
You get that scene. Yeah. I think it's is it in Genesis? Yes, Genesis is where Abby goes to the house that's being run by the Union. Yeah, what's he called? Sorry,
Wormley.
That's it. He's the Union guy, isn't he? And he's one of these people who, and I suppose there's a certain kind of prejudice in the way it's written. But also, I think it's probably a fair prejudice because I've known people like this myself. He's one of these people who's got a certain amount of power through working apparently to the benefit of the people around him. But because that power has sort of come to him, I guess to somebody who wouldn't have expected power, then that power becomes the dominant force in itself. And so Wormley takes the way he wields power in the Union into the post-apocalypse society and becomes this kind of, so he has this rhetoric about his way being the best way for everybody, but he's still keeping slaves in outhouses because he wants to make sure those at the center of it all are the ones who are able to maintain a certain amount of privilege. That's a really interesting place to take a character like Abby Grant so early, because she's the one who's come from privilege and is heading in the other direction, whereas Wormley has come from a place of no privilege and is heading in exactly the opposite direction she is. I don't think that's a Terry Nation one. I think that's the first one that's written by one of the other writers. Again, like I say, I don't have the list in front of me because of my computer problems, but I think No, that is episode 2. That is Terry Nation. Yeah. So this is Terry Nation who wrote. I mean, this for me compares with the first episode of Blake 7, where you've got that whole plot to discredit Blake at the start of the story, making for a really interesting beginning for his character that you wouldn't in a million years have expected to see in some kind of space opera type thing. It feels much more grounded and real and down to earth. And I think that same thing is happening in Genesis when Abby Grant goes and meets Wormley. And I think that sets up the sort of character dynamics for the entire series. And for all 3 years, I tell you one thing that I really notice is that for all 3 seasons, every time they meet somebody new, as a viewer, there's still a tension about, is this person going to be friendly or is this person going to stab them in the back? And that tension never lets up across all 3 series.
There's a brilliant moment in the last laugh where Greg gets written out, where that is perhaps the best example of that in all 3 series. Really takes you by surprise.
Yeah.
Well, not now. I've spoiled it. But,
well, no, but you've not said what it is, because that whole episode is full of there's sort of 2 or 3 twists in that. Yeah. And but they're all done. And so we're talking about series 3 now, but they're all done with this kind of grounded reality. I think that's something that Survivors never loses. So let's talk a little bit about 2 and 3. And I did watch all the way through them, and for the benefit of people who are listening and perhaps only know the first season, at the end of the first season, the idea was that they'd stay in this manor house sort of place and the story would be based from there. But the manor house, whatever it wasn't a manor house, it was whatever it was, this enormous building that they'd sort of taken possession of to film in halfway through series 1, gets sold and they get turfed out. And I don't know.
Not in the fiction.
Yeah, not in the fiction, in the behind the scenes. It gets sold in the production company, gets turfed out. And so what you've got then is, because this is on a fairly rapid turnaround, so between them finishing production on the last episode of the first series and starting production on the first episode of the next series just a few weeks later, they have to basically entirely rewrite the entire season to take into account the fact that they've lost their location.
And
so
the
I
lead.
think, well, yeah, I was going to bring this up as well. The lead, I think, I mean, the story is that Terence Dudley sacked her.
Yeah, I think there was the interview, the Big Finish interview CD she did, where it was because she was drinking quite heavily at the time, so she became unreliable. Which I can understand from a production point of view. He is doing his job at that point. If your lead actor can't handle everything,
But by the same token, there's no evidence of her struggling on screen in any of those series 1 episodes, and
Oh,
you'd
not
think
at
there
all.
would be if that was the case. So so while I suspect that that's probably the grounding for it, I should imagine that the reality of it is that because she was drinking, they were arguing, and the reason he sacks her is because of the arguments rather than because of the actual drinking itself, I suspect. Either way, point is, yes, she's gone anyway, which he must have known, or which he is pre-warned of before he discovers that they lose the setting. But the real reason why I brought it up is series 2 clearly suffers because all of those early scripts have been utterly rewritten. The first 2 or 3 are rewritten from scratch to set up what the rest of the series is going to be. And then from that point thereafter, everything else is rewritten to take into account the new characters and the new setting. So it's not just Abby who goes, but between the first and second series, you lose most of the main cast. And even one of the ones who holds over, Chris Tranchell, is gone second episode. And so to me, it's a real shock at the start of series 2 that a lot of the characters that I really liked, despite the fact that a lot of them weren't particularly good actors, I liked the characters and I liked the chemistry and the camaraderie, and that's gone in the second series. And I don't think Survivors ever quite gets that back. So I think the second series, so for me, watching it the whole way through, the second series it's about being disappointed that you've lost the group. It's about struggling through the first few episodes because it's clear that they're rewriting them by the seat of their pants. And so some of those first few episodes are not very strong. They've got good ideas. They've got a lot of good work in them. But as episodes, they don't really quite stand up because they've just not had time to hone them. But then actually, I think by the end of the second series, it starts getting stronger again. But then in the third series, something else happens that utterly buggers it for a second time. So between the first and second series, they lose one really massively important thing. And then between the second and third series, they lose Greg, who is like, he's not necessarily the main character, but I think he becomes the main character in series 2 without Abby. And then when you lose him in series 3, and in series 3, for some reason, they turn Lucy Fleming, Jenny, into this moaning, whining creature that just never shuts up about one thing and another. And I've got to say, the three of you probably watched maybe a couple of episodes from series 3, but she doesn't go an episode in that entire third series about whining about Greg and why he's not come back. It is so tedious. So there are some really strong episodes in series 3, and in the end, the narrative arc of series 3 I think is quite a strong one, and some of the situations and some of the stories they tell I think are really strong stories. But series 2 and series 3 are both buggered by the things they've lost, frankly. So I don't know, of the series, of the episodes that you did watch and of the impression that you did get, Dylan, I'll start with you, but series 2 and series 3, what did you think, I guess?
I mean, I think I share your sentiments from my memories of watching it all, and it's not that long ago that I did a full rewatch. There's probably a good second series if you sort of cherry picked the episodes from 2 and 3, and like even with all the production problems. But then I do sometimes it's the smaller episodes that don't quite work that I enjoy more, like the witch in series 2, where somebody just starts a rumor that Mina's a witch and she runs away, and it's all a bit not a lot happens, but it just sort of shows the devolution of society and, regressing back into, we're not too far away from the turn of the century and pre-industrial revolution and things like that. So it's just sort of the regression of society in that way. So while The Witch isn't the strongest episode, it's something that I did revisit, because I remember, like, when I was looking through the episode list, I was like, oh, The Witch, I remember that was an interesting concept. So
you know what? That also kind of gets a sequel. The episode with Patrick Troughton in also foregrounds Mina, and it's because of the stuff that she goes through in The Witch that really has an emotional resonance at the end. Because in The Witch, it's all about the fact that she's detached from the rest of the group. In the one with Patrick Troughton, the name of which escapes me, she finds something to become attached to, and then that's stolen away from her. And actually, I found that really emotionally jolting, that storyline.
And again, it's that thing of, you see Patrick Troughton show up and you assume he's going to be a big part of the episode. And he's killed in about the first 15 minutes or something like that, if I remember.
He is, but you don't find out till the end.
Of course, yeah.
The whole episode is about, is he still alive? Is he coming back? Was he a part of this group? Or have they done something to him? And you don't find out until the end. But you've now spoiled it for the listeners.
So, sorry, guys. But and I always liked Lights of London. I always thought that was fun. I mean, I know it's sort of seen as the good one from series 2 a lot of the time, but just again, it's that dip into another group of survivors elsewhere, and that people have tried to make a go of it in a city, which is, if you're ever trying to survive an apocalypse, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah,
and I love the way it opens
the world out. I love that they're trying to communicate with, is it France and other nations? You can see it being rebuilt. There's a sense of progress there, and that's what I love about that one.
John, what about your thoughts about the second and third series?
I mean, again, my memories from watching it during lockdown were when I got seriously in particular, and again with Lucy, it was, oh my God, not another week of this. But it was
quite striking watching it this time. How much of it there was, I'd forgotten.
Oh God, yeah. But I think something which was why I refreshed by something like Jim's already mentioned it, Mad Dog, and there was a lovely silver archive from Obus, which I didn't write. I'm not qualified to write on Survivors. I think Rich Cross, a guy who's done lots of writing on the internet about it.
He's on the videos, isn't he? I think
he is.
Him and Andy Priestner. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
but I think him and Andy Priestner are on the videos.
And he, and the tension in that story is fantastic. It's almost a little standalone episode, but it does remind you of how dangerous the world is. It's because, as Jim said, rabies was a big factor at that point in the 70s. I remember the tail end of that. People are frightened of dogs in France, because they might have rabies with the go over. And then just if rabies gets out, how do you contain it? It's just using this kind of chase scenario just to tell that story, to make the world a scary, dangerous place again. And I absolutely adore the way they do that.
I think they keep, despite the problems, I think there are some things in the second and third series that are just as strong as the first series. It's just those patchier, problems niggling at them. Yeah. Jim, your thoughts, given, the amount that you did watch.
Well, I'm interested to hear what you said about the problems that they had. I didn't realise that the house was sold. But
that's as I understand it. They lost the use of it. I think it was because it was sold. Yeah.
They certainly have a big clear out, didn't they? Of everybody. I won't say why. But having said what you said about the opening episodes of season 2, I actually like them the most. In fact, I only watched them, to be honest. I watched the first 4 because I went through the plot synopses for season 2 and 3, and I thought, I'll watch that one. And these are the ones that jumped out at me. I think Greater Love, the second episode where Paul is written out, is absolutely brilliant.
Yes,
that's as strong as anything. And then the tension in that is amazing. Lights of London is excellent. We do have to go back to the city, I think, at some point just to see what goes on and why it is far better not to be there.
Yeah.
And I think that's done very well. And the economy is, the budget is not overstretched, is it? Because having it set in the country all the time is easy to control the number of people and all that kind of stuff. You know, go closing roads or anything. But of course, they're all located into the underground system, so you can contain that and film everything that way, and film in the studio, which they don't often do in Survivors, but they do a few scenes here, don't they?
And the one thing they do is they do that one scene over ground where they do take an entire street and devastate it, and that sells you on the concept, doesn't it?
And there's a little bit where a trigger gets shot at in the on the banks of the Thames.
They dig a oval, don't they, and have a cabbage patch there.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, right the oval. But I think the rest of season 2 is where it gets a reputation for being turning into the good life. I think Terence Dudley's influence is felt more here. In fact, they've got the same the yellow Volvo they use in Survivors is the same one as Margot and Jerry drive in The Good Life, but that's just a coincidence. I remember when I went through the full watch through, I was getting a bit bored with season 2 because it was like the Archers really on TV.
The apocalyptic Archers.
Yes. So I didn't really enjoy that new direction very much. Hubert, I think, we were saying John Ebenezer is an incredibly tedious character, and there's too much of him in this. I guess slightly disagree with Dylan from my memory of The Witch. I thought that was the absolute nadir of the whole three series. But I'll watch it again. Now you said that. But I think
I was just going to say, I wonder if the thing of it is, in series 1, you've got this big story trajectory of a group of people coming together, and it might not sound like a big story, but when there's so few people left, a group of people coming together, it does have this sort of progress in its own right, this sort of forward progress in its own right. It becomes the story. In series 3, they very much lean into that. We need to switch the power on. We need to get the people together. We need to get phone lines working. So in series 3, there's a purpose. I wonder if what you're talking about, finding series 2 a bit dull, is just because series 2 seems to be the one that doesn't have an overall story going on. Yeah,
I mean, this stuff has to happen. It's just stuff I'm less interested in watching. I think I didn't check out of any episode particularly. I just thought as a whole it wasn't grabbing my attention so much. I think I found series 3 to be a return to form a bit. It's more of like it's on the road, isn't it? Mostly. The search for Greg Preston drives a lot of it, and I think Dennis Lill as Charles becomes the lead because Ian McCulloch didn't enjoy the new direction and disappears for most of series 3, although he does write some of it. I think Charles is a compelling enough character for that to work. I enjoyed it. Mad Dog is a brilliant episode. The Last Laugh, as I mentioned earlier, is absolutely stunning piece of TV. Law of the Jungle, where Brian Blessed turns up, is I'm in two minds about it. But a lot of people like it, don't they? I can't really understand why they're quite so trapped there.
Yeah. The first time I watched it, or rather, the first time I watched it on the discs, I found that a really striking episode, one that stuck in the memory. Watching it again this time, I'm more inclined to agree with you. Why the hell doesn't everybody just get the hell out of there? Because I mean, he says, right, you can't go because there's dogs, right? But I mean, it's him and about 2 other people and everybody else. So everybody else surely must be able to find some way to get out of there.
Yeah, so I found the premise a bit sort of daft in that. I mean, it's decent enough. Brian Blessed is actually quite good in it. But it stands out, but I'm not sure for the right reasons. But I haven't seen an awful lot of season 3 again. But I enjoyed the beginning of season 2 and season 3 as a whole more than the rest of season 2. But I think series 1 is the best.
Sure. Right, shall we tie up this conversation then by choosing an episode, or maybe not necessarily an episode, but a thing about the series that each of us would like to nominate as not necessarily our favorite thing, but something that impressed us the most, maybe? And okay, I'm springing this, so I will go first. and I will go back to what I talked about earlier, but the scene where they finally fetch up at the Grange, I think it's called, the house that they go into, and they're stuck outside. And they're stuck outside because they're the friendliest looking, potentially rabid dogs you could ever possibly hope to meet. But every time I watch the program, I just get this tremendous wave of not relief, but kind of just this thing that comes over me, that this kind of moment of arrival, that the thing that the series has been building towards, it's finally sort of arrived. And I think it's such an incredible shame that they lost that house, because I would love to have seen a second and third series that were based there and did stories where they could go out but come back to that base. I just think that would have been amazing. But yeah, for me, it's that episode and that scene where they arrive at the house that just means a lot to me in my sort of journey through the series. So I don't know, John, have you got an episode or a moment or a thing or something?
I tell you what, I'll go through that, as we refer to it, the way the community comes together, and as the beating heart, where you're getting hope, where you're getting society reformed, and then you get to, it's what that whole thing is what gives that last scene of Law and Order its power, because that might be one of the bleakest scenes ever put out on British television.
Yes. So I went for hope and you went for bleakness.
Despair.
Says all you need to know. Dylan, is there something that sticks out for you?
I want to talk about, I guess it's mainly in season 1, but it's the plot line of Vic, the guy who basically gets in bed with a woman out of his league early on in the series, and she leaves him for dead, and then his eventual suicide attempt, and before sort of being reunited with the woman that left him for dead. Yeah. And again, it's bleak, but it's one of the bleakest things, and the bleakest sort of character moments within that first series a lot of the time, I think, happens to this very tragic figure.
Who's played by a Time Lord, at least in some of the episodes, before they changed the actor, or after they changed it. I can never remember which way around it is. They changed
it's Fusion to start with, isn't it? And then runs for the Thatchers after he shoots his face off.
Yes.
Which is
Jim,
slightly disconcerting.
Well, he regenerates, doesn't he? It's clear as day. That's what he does. He regenerates.
Clearly, that's what's happened. Yeah.
Jim, if you've got something you'd like to nominate as a sort of moment or episode or whatever.
Well, I think it will be an episode. I think before doing this watch through, I think I would have said Mad Dog, because that's one that always stood in my mind as the best episode, and it really is. Survive is sort of distilled into its basic thing. I mean, it's Charles trying to survive, and there's people who in normal walk of life will probably be okay, decent people, but they have to kill him to protect the community because I think he's got rabies. So I think it's a distillation of the horrors of living in this kind of world. But having watched The Last Laugh again, I'm going to have to say that, because it's if you follow,
it's all that to the power of 10.
Yeah, because we've been following Greg. I mean, he is kind of the lead, I think. He disappears a little bit, I guess. But if you're watching, I liked him as a character. I mean, he's a bit humorless, and the actor has said that. He's got a face like a smacked arse throughout most of this, but he is the one that I was kind of following with, identifying with, perhaps not for the right reasons.
Somebody who's so miserable, he has incredible amounts of charisma, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's very he's 70s man, isn't he, with his double denim.
Proto Morrissey.
Well, I was getting the impression that Greg is, when I go out scavenging, he's probably looking for Old Spice wherever he can find it. He's that kind of person. But as I say, you've been following him. Yes, you've been following him through all the trials and tribulations. He gets a hot air balloon, goes to and from Norway, for Christ's sake, and all this other stuff, and then just for a couple of bits of bad luck, it's all over. And he has the kind of the David Tennant chance to kind of say some goodbyes at the end, and it's quite heartbreaking.
that scene where he has this sort of final scene with the rest of the cast is just incredible, isn't it?
It's brilliant
and horrible, but yeah. Right. In a few weeks, I don't know if we'll do it this side of Christmas or maybe the other side of Christmas, but we should definitely get together and watch the revival. So that's only 12 episodes in total. And we should talk about that, because I think it's one of those things where you probably can't divorce it from the original, but at the same time, I think you should try to appreciate it under its own steam. So I think a rewatch of it would be a good chance to sort of try and properly take stock of it.
Yeah.
So we'll give that a go, probably in a couple of months, maybe in January if we don't get around to it before Christmas. Until then, I was JR.
I was Dylan.
I was Jim.
And I was John.
And we will speak again soon.